and they kept dropping the age on things. They dropped, the Navy dropped their age limit to 18 years old for the B5 program. If you had a high school education and passed the physical and were smart, they take you. And we had some 18-year-olds flying combat. So, and I was in the 18-year-old group, and back in those days, we went through the program in about 9 months, and joined the squadron, trained on a carrier, and the whole bit. So I was always the youngest, and now I'm always the oldest. The average age, okay, why is this base here? In 1942, the Army Air Corps built this base for P-51s. This is where they came and got their gunnery polished and got everything going, and then they go overseas from here. Or if they didn't, they'd probably wash them out and put them in the instructor base someplace. So the Korean War came along, and guess what? Everybody after the war got out of World War II. And when the Korean War started, they didn't have any they had airplanes, but no pilots. So they went back to the technique they used in World War I and opened a bunch of contract schools. Bartow is probably the flagship school. Then there was Graham Air Force Base at Mariana, if any of you have been up there. There's Bainbridge, Georgia, Spencefield and Moultrie, Georgia, Malden, Missouri, Hondo, Texas, Columbus, Mississippi, Marana, Arizona, and Kinston, North Carolina. So that's 9 schools. And we had, at Bartow here, we started out with class 52D, and we got students in July '51. They advertised for pilots in some of the local papers, and the Air Force sent in 4 T6s. If you were chosen, you had to get qualified in the T6, contacting instruments before they send you to. Then they sent us to Craig Air Force Base, where we went through the whole student program. The contractor was Garner Aviation Services, Inc., out of Lynchburg, Virginia. And they came down and staffed it and hired the pilots. The first class came, we got the students, excuse me, we went to Craig Air Force Base on May 16th, 1951, and stayed there 6 weeks. And we came back and got our students in just before the 4th of July. And then we got the next class 6 weeks after that, and then we ended up with four classes at a time at this base. And each class had approximately 150 students, and we had two sections, section 1 and section 2. So each section had about 80 students with 20 instructors, and we had this was taken before they doctored the field up with the second runway and we had 135 T6s on the ramp, and we put 100 in the air every hour.
Wow.
The students lived in these buildings back here. The contractor rehabbed the whole base and leased it from the city of Bartow. They got the deed from the Air Force after World War II. So we had a regular beehive over here, but it was well supervised, and we had an excellent safety record. The we had, just to give you a little thumbnail sketch, we trained 3 astronauts here. Buzz Aldrin was in class 52E in 1951, and I happened to be his flight commander, and flew with him, and he was an excellent student. So we had 4 flights on this, but once we got all of the geared up, we had 4 flights with one week we'd fly in the morning, the next week we'd fly in the afternoon, and the other times we were in ground school. So the students, and they marched everywhere. I mean, singing songs and doing all the things that you could imagine. The flight was with 20 instructors. You had a flight supervisor and an assistant, and then you had a dispatcher that assigned the airplanes to the different students and instructors. What was added after World War II was the Air Force considered flying safety a primary situation. They vigorously investigated at each accident, and as I said before, our record was above average. We had the T6Gs from 51 till about 55. And in 53, the Air Force added the Super Cub for additional screening, thinking that we could. It was successful, but we put the Cubs at Gilbert Field, and we'd bus the students up there, and at night they'd stand them on their nose and put them all in a hangar. I stayed up there as flight plane screening commander for 1 year. Coming back, we got rid of the light planes when the T-34, T-28 program started in the middle 50s. And the T-34 was a much easier plane to fly than the T-6. The T-6 had a little tendency to want to wander. The T-28 was it was the A model, and it was a rather easy airplane for the students to fly. We had if you flew in the afternoon, we had night flying every night with airplanes going cross country all over the south part of Florida. The T-37 was hooked up to the once we got the dual runway. That was done for the T-37s, and we had those from 1958 till the base closed in 1961. The Air Force had standardization boards flying. We had Inspector General here twice a year checking on things, and it was the thing that they insisted on was the oral presentation had to be the same with every student. I mean, you had to describe, if you were going to describe a takeoff, you had to use the language that they had written out for you. So if the student gets another instructor, there's no learning his methods. So we had at one time here we had 180 instructors, and they were all World War II vets. And after they put a couple of classes through, they were really above average, especially in that T6. As I said before, we leased Drain Field, and that's where we sold most of the kids. And then we had Winter Haven, and then we had Lake Wales, and we were the sole. There's no civilian general aviation flight at those fields, and the Air Force insisted that we have a hard stand down on the landing end of the runway, and we would have a flight commander in the little miniature tower down there, and he was grading landings, and if somebody was wandering, he'd send them around and take the necessary action. And in Drain Field, the instructors never told the kids when they were going to solo. They go out and fly, and then all of a sudden they just pull them off the side and get out and say, "Give me 3 good landings." Most of the students were surprised. And once the student soloed, he'd ride with the instructor, and then he'd have a solo hop that he'd fly 2 hops in that day. We put in the Cub program, we put 20 hours on them, and in the T6 program after that, we put 110, and that included night flying and the works. And if you had weather, you flew on the weekends. I mean, we had to keep that schedule. But it was it was really a lot of fun because everybody knew what they were doing. Bartow pretty much had the flag officers' children from the academies. They all wanted to be at Bartow, and we take them when they come down to visit. We take them to Cypress Gardens and entertain them, and it was a good program. The nucleus of the new German Luftwaffe, we had 4 German flyers that we put through the program here, and also the Japanese. We retrained them, and then we gave them our T6s when we got rid of them, and gave them our flight programs and the whole thing. So that was an interesting situation. I had a chance to fly with both of those groups. The Japanese were very smooth. The Germans were a little bit more aggressive, and but all was well. And they went back and formed their new air forces. When we started out, we had the control tower. We had a wooden building that was down in this area down here, and the tower sat on the top of that wooden hangar. And it was a wooden hangar because in World War II they didn't have any steel to put. There was wooden trusses and the whole thing, and that since has been taken down. And then we had they went out in Texas and bought this tower that's here now, and put that up in the middle 50s, and that was a great improvement. so everything has a beginning and an ending, and they started closing the bases down about 1959, and they closed Kinston, North Carolina down, and the Flying Training Air Force, they did such a good job of closing it down. The Bartow contract was up that year, and Mr. Garner elected not to continue. So the Surveyor people came down in '59, and I don't think they knew that they were here and closed the base. But and the other bases all kind of folded at the same time. We that's about all I can tell you. If anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
When were you training the Japanese and the Luftwaffe pilots? What year was that?
We were doing that in the middle '50s, and they were just students. And another thing, a lot of people got out of the Air Force, and civilian life didn't suit them. They got back in, but then they had to do what we call the retread. So we had about 8 or 10 of them here all the time, and they were harder to train than the students because they had some bad habits. So and I was talking to a few of you people before. My son was a Air Force pilot in the '60s in England. We were traveling in England. He was based in England for a while, and I walked into the ready room, and his flight commander was one of our former students that I had flown with. And the astronauts that we trained here, Buzz Aldrin, as I said, in '52E, and a fellow named Bob Coe, and Ed White. I flew Ed White. The military had 6 check pilots, and there's a 50-hour check and the final check, and the civilians flew one, and then either the 50 or the 100, and the military flew the others. And I flew Ed White on his final check, and he was unfortunately he was killed on that fire, but he was an excellent student. All right, that's pretty much the history of, and you've got one of probably the finest airports in the state right here, right now, and it's a real asset for the community. Any more questions?
Mr. Wood, how many T-38s you mentioned and they were on the field, and then what kind of transition was it to go to the, I guess, the Tweety Bird jet?
To the jet?
Yeah.
The T-30, the T-37?
Yeah, T-37s.
Well, it was an easy transition. It was just a matter of, we had oxygen from the ground up, and it was an easy airplane to fly.
Approximately how many T-37s were on the field?
I think we had about 75. And another thing, the maintenance, we had absolutely wonderful maintenance. Very few airplanes could fail the pre-flight checks, and they had enough parts down in supply to build a T6. And these were local people that we had 800 civilians and 1,000 military. And that made quite an economic impact on the local situation. But we were the 3303rd Primary Training Squadron Flying Training Air Force. There were some good years. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a question. How long did the students spend here?
How long?
How long would the student be here for
They'd be here
training?
6 months.
6 months, oh, wow.
Yeah, they went from here to Vance and to different places. And Williams had the F-86 jet, and a bunch of our boys got into that program.
Mr. Wood?
Yes.
Are you from here, or did the flight training bring you here and you just stayed?
I was in Tampa,
Yeah?
and I flew over in my lunch hour, and they hired me. So, told me to show up, and I was one of the check pilots on the four airplanes we had. So I was here from the get-go, and it was exciting.
And you stayed and moved to this area?
Oh yeah. Well, we all came to Bartow and stayed in the Oaks Hotel for one night, and then most of us lived in either Lakeland or Winter Haven.
Okay.
And you were training during World War II, or you flew during World War II?
I was a combat pilot in World War II.
What did you fly, sir?
I flew the SBD and the SB-2C.
That's also known as the Catalina?
No, the SB-2C was a dive bomber.
Okay.
It was a big Curtiss dive bomber.
Okay.
In World War II, the Navy gave you all the old airplanes from the 30s. So I flew a biplane dive bomber made by Curtiss, and I flew a Northrop dive bomber.
No.
But we really the SBD was the airplane that won the Battle of Midway. So, but it was too slow. The T6s, the F6s and the TBFs would outrun us. So the SB-2C can stay with them.
How many horsepower did the T6s have that you had here?
600.
So they were 600 horsepower radial engines. And just for the kids, Mr. Terry Stevens brought his AgCat, his Grumman AgCat
Yes.
over. And that's got 650 horsepower. So when you look at that radial engine that's on the front of Mr. Stevens' airplane, that's very similar in size to the T6 motors and in power.
They've kind of boosted that one up a little bit. They're getting 650 out of it. It was a 1340 engine from Pratt & Whitney.
Same engine, yeah.
But the thing that we had is that we had a very tightly integrated base, and we had good control. The Air Force is looking at us all the time, but Bartow had a good reputation for being above average.
To your knowledge, could the Air Force come back in and take this base right now?
The city of Bartow owns it.
Okay.
The contractor with the primary program was leasing it from the city.
Oh, okay.
The city, when they got it from the Air Force the first time after World War II, they weren't property managers, and we had a lot of different activities here that we had to replace. So the base ran very well because we had all the airspace around and nobody else is flying. we had night club, just a little personal comment. When the base closed, shut down at 5 in the afternoon, if my bunch was flying in the afternoon, I was the base commander from then on out, because it was up to me if we had cross countries out and the dew point, the temperature were getting together and the things were getting all of a sudden getting a little foggy. We never had any problems with that, but it was nerve-wracking. And then people getting lost. But another thing, we had all the NATO people. We had Frenchmen, we had some Germans, we had some Iranians, and who else? We had a bunch of Englishmen, but the Frenchmen, they put them over at Lackland Air Force Base and gave them two weeks in English, and they couldn't speak anything. So we hired 2 French instructors, Pierre Guet and Jacques Formeau. Well, all they did is just harass the students, almost whacking them. So I decided what to do. I had 20 instructors. I gave each instructor a Frenchman or a Belgian. We had the Netherlands, and we had the Italians. The Italians they were a trip, but we didn't let them talk to each other. You put them. We'd get in there in the morning, and the flight commander would give them the orders of the day and so on. Then the instructors would talk to them. I'm going to fly you first, and you second, you third, and what to do. And when he was flying the other boys, the other 2 people would have to start teaching that Frenchman the lesson and teach him English. And no Frenchmen talking to each other, except I'm sure when they were in the barracks, but we had them fluent in 6 months. They were just one of the boys, and had all the slang and the whole bit. So that was an interesting situation that happened. And it was a cross section of the whole world, and these World War II guys took it up, and I often said if they could get an orangutan tied to the front seat, they could teach them to fly. So
Mr. Wood, what was the washout rate overall?
well, in the situation, a grade slip was made out for the student every day, and if it was a white slip, and that's what, as a supervisor, I had to monitor that. If they started pink slipping them, I'd go ride with the boy, and find out just if it was a personality conflict or if it was just a student that just was having a lot of problems. So we had a high degree of graduations, and but if you wanted to eliminate somebody, it was just like going to court. You had the instructor had to build the case, and then he would go to a board action, and that I would have to go and testify against him, especially if I wrote him. And then and many times they just put him in the other squadron, give him 10 more hours. Especially when we integrated. I mean, and another thing, the first 5 years we were here, the students were highly motivated. The last 5, they started the they come in and say, I don't want to fly anymore. Self-initiated elimination, and that we never had that before. So we had to work on that. Anybody else got anything that they think they wanna talk about?
How many total flight hours you got, sir?
How much
How many total flight hours and you have right now?
do I have? I've got about 6,000.
Wow.
And I've got a good friend that was in that same group that went to Craig Field with us, and he's 96, but just like you guys, I mean, he's with it, and he's driving his car and doing all these different things, and lost my train of thought there. But most of the instructors were, when they got here, were in their 30s, and mature men, and were kind of role models for they go over to the instructor's house and have barbecue and do all these different things, and it was just a nice tight knit unit, and everybody. You know, you're doing what you love and you got paid for it. I mean, that was the whole deal. We had the link trainer department. We had if you put your flight through without an accident, we gave you a dinner. We go over to Chalet Suzanne and have a big party. And then after we started having reunions in the 80s, and we'd have those at the Chalet once a year, and it had a big turnout. But then we'd take a picture out there in front of the Chalet. But the first picture was that big, the next one's and and pretty soon we're down to about 20 people. So the Grim Reaper is still out there, some of my friends put me through that master pilot deal from the FAA, and I've been flying for 72 years.
Wow. Are you still flying, Mr. Wood?
Yes, I am. I've got a Legend Cub, and I had a carotid artery sales, so that I've still got my last physical that I passed, and I'm flying on my driver's license.
Good for you.
But I don't. Very seldom do I just come down and want to fly alone. If I haven't got somebody that wants to ride them. But I've got 4 boys, and my number 3 boy is a very accomplished aviator and stays with the simulators and the whole bit. And we've always had about 5 airplanes. My hangar is where the old chapel used to be, and that chapel got a good workout with all those students here. They married every girl within 20 miles of here. And the nice thing about it is, they were all, that top 5% of the population, they were all college boys and smart. And where do you go when you get out of the service? You go back to where your wife came from. So that enriched our whole lives here. Just a lot of those people, because we trained a bunch of them here, and a bunch of them got married. But there was still a whole lot of bachelors that were water skiing over on Eagle Lake, and to go to Tampa and going to. I mean, it was. We had an officers club. The county was dry, mind you, and we had an officers club where you could buy drinks over the bar and what have you, so that the people in Winter Haven loved to have cocktail parties out here. They had a big swimming pool. It was right behind the north, the flat building where your business is.
Yes, sir.
The club was open in that area right there.
Oh, okay.
And you know, in the city on that first go around, at least leased this whole part of the, and that runway is taken out of action, and we use that runway all the time. But we had 4 flight buildings, two here and 2 here, and then they put those with the concrete roof, with the inverted T, and gave us air conditioning. Before that, we had the windows open and the curtains flying and the whole thing. But it was, nobody had air conditioning back in those days, except in their car. Okay, well, I'm pretty much through, and unless anybody's.
Well, we really
Well,
thank you.
thank you very much.
Yeah. Get behind Mr. Wood. I want to get a picture of you all. Just kind of get behind him there. Maybe we'll make Mr. Wood more famous and get him in the paper again.
No, don't do that.
Get in there, Brian.
Hey, you're taller than someone here.
All right, guys.